It's all new to me. Want me to start? I'm Tillie Simion. I have lived in Red River since 1930. We came from Kansas, and it was my husband was a coal miner, and it was during the 1929 Depression, and he was out of work, and we took it for a while, and then he decided that he would go look for work. And he called me Cookie. I was some cookie, you know. But anyway, he called me Cookie. And he said, when I get my first $50, I will send for you and the boy. So he left. And there was a lot of anxiety until we heard from him. And then when we heard from him, he was in Dawson, New Mexico. Being a miner, he followed the mines, and he came to Dawson, New Mexico, and that's north of here. And of course he got work, but the mines only worked 3 days a week. And that, of course, that isn't much money. And he met another boy, a man, that had a car. My husband didn't have any transportation. And he met this man with transportation. And they decided, they heard about the Amali mine at Red River needing miners. So they got in the car one day and came to Red River. And they were hired $3 a day, 6 days a week. And if you were in ore or discovered ore, you would get more money. You would get more money. So they went to work, and they loved it. They lived at the boarding house. There was a boarding house. They lived at the boarding house, and they lived in the bunkhouse and eat in the boarding house. They had bunkhouse and boarding house. They lived in the bunkhouse and eat in the boarding house. But of course he got tired of that, so he decided that he would build a cabin. So he built us a cabin, 16 by 24, and he brought all the material, and the labor and the furnishings all went through the commissary, and it was deducted from his check every month, or every payday. So we got our first $50 and on our way. So on July the 4th, 1930, my son and I, we landed in Raton, New Mexico. And of course, my husband and the car, the man that had the car, were there to meet us. We had to get back home because my husband on the mine baseball team, he was the catcher. So he had to play on the team, and he got me, and then up to Red River, he got me to my cabin, just dumped me, and he went to play ball. He went to play ball. Of course, I was sick from the ride, or else the high altitude got to me, and I just went to bed. And of course, I had a 7-year-old boy, and naturally he wanted to go barefooted. He went out and started searching the hills and stepped into cactus. And of course, we spent the rest of the day with him screaming, picking cactus thorns. And if I'd had any money or any transportation, I think I would have been back in Kansas. So that was my initiation into New Mexico. So we stayed. It was just one room, a kerosene stove, which of course throws out fumes. And I got curtains and knickknacks and fixed up the cabin. And we had everything in the corner, our bed and his bed, you know what I mean. But no bath, no electricity, not a thing. Just kerosene or Coleman lamps. Of course, they had a Atwater Kent radio, battery operated. Of course, Amos and Andy were the popular stars then. And Joe Penner, remember Joe Penner? I want to buy a duck. Y'all remember that? Well, that's what we'd hear every day, you know. So we stayed, and I washed with outside. We had rocks built on a rock fire, you know, rock built the fire, and I had a number 3 wash tub. Filled that with water, washed on a washboard, boiled the clothes, boiled and then we had a number 3 tub then to take our baths in, but we heated all this water out because our kerosene stove was just 3 burners, 1, 2, 3, you know. So that was that. But we liked it. He liked the mountains. We would hike and pick up rocks or just do anything. And then when he got enough money, well, he bought us our first car, a Chevrolet. It was a red car with a rumble seat. $865. Now they're $12,000, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. 806. So in that way, we could go more. And of course, Mr. Carmen was the mine foreman. He ruled with an iron hand, and the moly in those days was pure, and of course it was in demand, not that which it isn't now. It was, and now it's low grade, and he ruled with an iron hand. And that's the reason the mine was such a success. His men had to go to bed, they had to be in, and the Spanish lived on one side of the canyon, and the Anglos lived on the other side, but we were all friends. There was no such thing as racial problems, no such things as racial problems. The commissary would open every day at 3 o'clock. You'd go to buy your food. Of course, all they had was staples. Nothing, fresh, they just had staples. But the telephone was there. And in those days, in the 30s, the Molly Mine got all their mail from Red River. It would be Molybdenum Corporation, Red River, New Mexico. I don't know what the deal was. I think I know, but I don't know. But since then, it has been changed to Cuesta, New Mexico. So, but in those days, the mail would come to Red River, and Mrs. Johnson and Miss Brandenburg had the post office, and then they would resack our mail, and it would be sent down to the mine, and the commissary, the office, would open it, and we had pigeonhole boxes alphabetically, and our mail would be put in those boxes. So that was that. So let's see what else.
Big Tony got fired, so he can't hear.
I can't hear you.
Big Tony got fired, so he can't.
Oh, and then of course one day he got real cocky. We were there a year or so. We were there a year or so. Of course, my son had his first schooling there. He was 7. He had his first schooling, and he had all the grades. And we were there, and 30 till 32, or maybe almost 33. And then one day, Tony got real cocky and talked short to the mine foreman. Of course, he was let out. Then, of course, when he was let out, why, he said, well, they can fire me, but they can't make me leave the valley. So we came to Red River, New Mexico. So that's the reason we are here. Of course, I love the country, and he certainly did. He was a fisherman. And we came to Red River, and we knew the Horace and Mary Johnson, who have gone on. They had the store up where that big Finks used to be up here. It was an old log cabin, and they had the store, the telephone, Notary Public, and if you had to do anything or know anything, you had to go to them. If they had that one telephone, they had the phone. And we knew them, and in the meantime, we had played bridge with them through the week. They liked bridge, and of course we did too. So we went up there, and they didn't want us to leave. Of course, I was ready to go back to Kansas. But I thanked myself 1,000,001 times that I didn't. But anyway, I was ready to go, and Miss Johnson talked to me and begged me to stay, and they had an old cabin. And the old cabin is over on High Street, the schoolhouse, and then High Street. And no one had lived in it for over 100 years, I don't think. But anyway, it was all right. And they wanted us, said we could go and stay there until we made up our minds what we wanted to do. So, of course, a lot of begging, so I decided that I would stay. So, and the Johnsons, of course, wanted us to open a cafe. And a cafe is something that I was always a school teacher, and I had never run a cafe, and she wanted us to open a cafe. But of course, in Red River, you've got to be versatile. You've got to just be able to do anything. You just, no matter what it is, you've got to meet the occasion. So I stayed. So we went over there, swept down the walls, cleaned it. It was just a long room. It had a stove in it. I don't know what was ever in it. It had some shelves and a counter, maybe some chairs, I don't know. And we went over there and swept the walls down. And no water. We had to carry the water from the river. And in the meantime, my husband had, you've seen those wagons, 2 wheels here and the wagon tongue here, the wheels and the bed here and then the wheel. And So you had 2 barrels put on this bed so that we hauled the water from the river. And we hauled the water, and of course I was the horse, you might know. So we hauled the water from the river. Not twice a day, but we got it all scrubbed down and washed, and new curtains and dishes and pots and pans. And we opened the cafe, and of course it was called the Evergreen. Can y'all hear me? It was called the Evergreen. And of course I was the Evergreen, still am. But anyway, that's the way we got started. So we opened it, and it was a year of the drought, the dust storms in Oklahoma. And the people just poured in here. They just poured in here. I don't know how they ever heard of Oklahoma, but just to get away from those dust storms, because their homes were all covered, their machinery was all covered, And they came and would eat with me, and we just went on from there. And of course the people were all nice. Amarillo came, Panhandle, it was all Panhandle, they all came. And there wasn't too much of Dallas and Fort Worth and Houston, and it was all Panhandle, which was all right with me. So that's the way we got going. And then in the meantime, Earl and Ada Romer came, had an ad in the paper where Ada wanted a job. They came from Rocky Ford, wanted a job cooking. So we answered her ad. So Ada came, and she cooked for me. And Earl, her husband, was a maintenance man at Grandview Camp, which is now is condos now. The cabins are all gone right up there, condos now. So Earl worked for the Clappers, Mr. and Miss Clapper. He was their maintenance man. So Ada worked for me. And of course, Earl got a room over there, so she got to stay with him. So we just kept on going. And then liquor came in 35. We got our first beer license. Beer was 15 cents. A shot was 15 cents. And New Mexico went wet in 35. The entire state went wet. We have the liquor license. I have the first liquor license, and still have it. And I still have the license when I opened the cafe in 1934. So we just went on from there. And then my husband was a Kansas veteran. From Kansas, he was in World War I the entire time, and of course, at World War I, and Kansas paid their men a bonus. And my husband got an $800 bonus. So our $800 came, and we bought where the bar is now. It's the Mother Lode right up here. We bought 5 lots from Mr. Packard. And the lots were $12 a piece, now they're $18,000 and $20,000, so figure it all out. And they were $25 a piece, so we bought the lots. We bought 5 lots from him for $125. And as Tony said, you can't make me leave the valley. He loved it really better than I did. So we opened the bar. And that's the reason we have so many gables. We have 4 gables on the bar. First bar, and then the cafe, and then the dance hall, and the curio shop. And we didn't take trips like everybody does now. We didn't go anyplace. We just stayed, and as we made money, I don't know that you made money, but a nickel was a nickel then, and a nickel is nothing now. You can throw it away and not miss anything, But in those days, a nickel was a nickel, and a dime was a dime. So, and then with getting acquainted, we did all of our shopping. There wasn't anything, no stores, so we did all of our shopping in Raton. He was a Legionnaire. He belonged to the Elks. He belonged to the veterans organizations. And as he got painted in Raton, of course we could borrow money, you know what I mean. So that's the way we got started. So we built the first bar and just had dancing in the bar. And then as we made more, we just built on and got it all done, and other things as well. And my husband was a very ambitious man. He was a go-getter. He could just get things done and knew how and did. And then, of course, we had all that. And then we had the Monte Vista Lodge, then the Monte Vista, the bar. And then in 35 then, I think the Monte Vista Lodge, which is where the bank is now. The folks came from Oklahoma. Daddy John Wagner and Mama Zoe Wagner came from Oklahoma with their daughter. And they built the Monte Vista Lodge. completely modern, but they could afford their own light plant and their own water. They pumped the water up. They pumped the water up the river. You all drank river water, and nobody died. They all drank river water, but they would pump it up into a tank for pressure so it would come into the rooms so they could have it for baths and have water pressure. And the lodge was just beautiful. There's postcards on it now, and it was just a beautiful place. It was modern, but not modern that the 24 rooms had baths. They had for hims and for hers. You know, they had for hims and for hers. And I tell you, maybe you don't think after Saturday night if that wasn't a mess, I'm telling you. After being in the bars all night. But anyway, we lived through it. So that was my initiation. But we kept it, for several years. And then, of course, in the meantime, the town was building up. The town just grew. So many people came and started their businesses. And I'm still here. I wish he were here, but he isn't. He's always predicted that Red River would be something. And I don't know whether there will be something or not, but anyway, maybe it will. I don't know. But anyway. So, and I'm still here. And then we had the Evergreen Sandwich Shop. And then we came down here to the bar. And next to the Evergreen Sandwich Shop was a house. It was the Dodd. They named it the Dodd House. And the Dodd House was named after a mining man. And that was next to me. And then next to the Dodd House was Mr. Westerby. And that house is still there. Mr. Westerby was an old-timer in the early days. He was a trapper and a taxidermist. In fact, his house was just filled with mounted animals. And, of course, they've all passed on. And then as we go on, and the road, the highway doesn't go where it goes now. That was all swampland. You go straight, you didn't go straight. You turned there at Dr. Steidler's and went this way, then you went that way. And then when you went that way, then Bert Phipps had his home there. He had a wife and 3 children. And then you go on from there, just nothing, until you got to Young's Ranch, Mr. and Mrs. Young. They had a ranch with a few cabins. But remember, there wasn't a thing modern in those days. No one had baths or electricity or electric irons or washers. It was all washboard, you know. And it was Young's Ranch. And then from Young's Ranch, we went on up to Tall Pines Camp. And the Tall Pines Camp then was run by 3 brothers, George, Rich, and Reed Oldham. They had an old Dodge car, and I can still see them jogging along Main Street. But anyway, they ran the lodge, the 3 brothers, but the camp was not modern. And then the boys passed on, and then the heirs, H-E-I-R-S, the heirs came in, the family, and they came in, and they started operating the lodge, and there's Winifred and Florence, 2 of them now. They came in 1935. In fact, they have had their 50 years of business in Red River. They started in, not counting the brothers' time, they're counting so they'd had their 50 years of business in Red River. So they came, of course the camp is a resort now, completely modern and family operated. She has a museum. And then you go from there, the road up the river was just a trail. Just only 1 horse could go up at a time. You couldn't go up, you had to go one. And the good fishing, of course, was all up the river. All lake fishing, but you get a horse or get your burro or whatever. But it was too narrow a road. But as time went on, of course now they have a new road. You can go as many cars as you want and do anything that you want. And there's a lot of homes built up the river, a lot of homes, beautiful homes. No businesses yet, but a lot of homes up there. So, then coming back down into town, we had the bar. And of course the lodge was built, Mama Zoe, we call them Mama Zoe and Daddy John. And they had the lodge, and of course they brought in everybody from Oklahoma. And then gambling came in. Of course, gambling was illegal in New Mexico. It was illegal every place, except Nevada. It was illegal. And of course, we knew it was illegal, but no one else in Taos County cared, so it didn't make any difference. So we just kept on having gamblers. And of course, gambling in those days is all operated by men, not us. We came from Kansas where it was dry. We didn't know bourbon from Scotch or Scotch from bourbon, or, Kansas was a dry state. But you soon learn. But anyway, you soon learn. So gambling came in. So they had slot machines, blackjack, poker, but the tourists just loved it. They'd bring their kids and just sit them at the machines and give them the money. But you could play with the nickel. But now, the machines is a quarter and $1, I think $1. And you could play dice for 25 cents. Now it's $5. You have to throw down $5 for your first play. And in those days, it was a quarter. But of course, in those days, you could make money on a quarter. But you can't do it now. You can't do it now. So, and the gambling helped and really went over big. And of course, as the town grew and the town got bigger, a lot of mad wives. And of course, one reason they couldn't report, there weren't any telephones. There weren't too many phones in town. Everybody didn't have a phone. Now every Tom, Dick, and Harry's got a phone, and all the kids have got telephones. Now, so it all adds up. It all adds up. So they just couldn't go and call, which you could go now. Just go to your room and call. Those days they couldn't call the law because there weren't any phones. Whoever had them was just one or two, So, and gambling went on then for about 1949. And then, of course, the state came in and state finally came in and put a stop to it. So that ended the gambling era. So, in the meantime, the town was building. I'm trying to think what the first motel was. The Lodge was the first thing. And,
El Sombrero was the first modern one.
I can't hear you.
El Sombrero was the first.
El Sombrero? Oh, yeah. Oh, El Sombrero came in. John Wagner Jr. was a son of Daddy John. El Sombrero came in and built the El Sombrero. It's a Sundance now that has the Mexican food. It was a Sundance. And it was a lovely, modern place. But everybody still had to have their own water in their pumps, And REA did not come in until 1948. Electricity didn't come in until 1948. But we all had wells and a pump. And those pumps just pumping all the time, So El Sombrero was built.
Riverside was already here. Riverside. They had cabins, some others.
Well, I can't hear.
The Londons had the Riverside.
Oh, well, I'll go up the street. I'll get them as I go up the street. The El Sombrero was there. And, of course, where the post office is now. Remember, there wasn't any post office there now. Postal is up there where, uptown where that big white building is. We call it Finks. I don't know what they call it now. There's something up there now. I don't know. And, I forget what I was going to say. Riverside was the next lodge, wasn't it? Riverside. Mr. and Mrs. Munden had Riverside. They had it. They had Riverside. And then on High Street, the Romers had their home on High Street. Ada worked for me, and I told you Earl, and then they built them a home over there. And then John Wagner had El Sombrero. And then
Grandview. The Clappers had Grandview. Grandview.
Oh, and then Grandview was, but that camp was already here. That was owned by Clapper. That was an old camp. Grandview Camp in Westerby's. And then, as I said, we went on down the street, went to Young's Ranch in your place. And then we came up here, and then Mr. Lyman Pratt had Rio Colorado. Didn't Lyman have Rio Colorado? And they had cabins. They're still up here, owned by Mr. Booker from Lubbock, right up here on the corner. Then next to him was the Walt Janney home, the Sherrard house, and Mother Pratt's home. Mother Pratt is home is right up there now. There's something in it, but I don't know what. But Mother Pratt's house, Mr. Pratt was a mining man. He owned the Carabel mine up Pioneer Canyon. And but they've all gone on, and of course their homes are still here. And then of course our bar, and the Johnsons still had their store going over there. Of course they've all gone on, and the Finks bought it, and it's been sold a half a dozen times since. You just can't keep up with who buys and who sells. And then coming on down into town, I thought you gals were going to ask me questions.
We're going to.
Then we came on downtown to Munden's, and in the meantime,
I think Jack and I, Brandenburg, you remember where they had their grocery store over there on High Street?
the Brandenburgs, the Brandenburgs had their first store down there at that end of town, and then they came up here and on High Street and built their store. Up on High Street where they had the post office, Francis.
Yeah.
Up on High Street, they had the post office. And of course I'll have to tell you about the post office. In the first place, it was only a second-class office, no money. A second class is just cancellation. And of course, everybody wanted it, of course, but Miss Brandon, the Johnsons, I'll tell you about the feud. The Johnsons had the post office all the time. They were Republicans. They had all the, but just second class. There weren't any people here, and just cancellation. But of course, when all these people come in now, which Bob had, if it was cancellation, you'd really make money. Because everybody and all this mail coming in, you know, you'd make money. But in those days, there wasn't anybody here. Over 10 or 15 families would stay all winter, you know, nobody here. So Roosevelt, of course, was in for 16 years, you know. And 16 years, ruined the country. But anyway, the Johnsons, of course, were Republicans. And then Mrs. Brandenburg decides that she wanted, they were living at that end, the Brandenburgs were living down there where you go on this road and then the bridge. It's where Wayne Kidd lives now. The Brandenburgs live there. And she decided she wanted the post office. So the battle was on in 34. And it was zipped back and it was zipped there, then it would be zipped back. Miss Johnson's had two sisters. She made them Democrats real quick, you know. So they would get it, you know. So they would get it, you know. And of course, it just didn't work. And I think when it was sitting, in those days, you had to take your test, you had to have the highest grade, you know, and all. But anyway, so that was the history of the post office. So Miss Brandenburg finally got the post office, and it was she had down at that end of town. It's on High Street where you have to stop where that bridge is, and then that first house there, I think Wayne Kidd lives in the house. And they had a post office. They had, there's little groceries in there, and I think they had a liquor license too. But anyway, she had the post office. Then of course, the battle was still going on, you know. And Nellie got the highest grade, so Nellie got it back. So then Miss Brandenburg comes down on High Street just a little ways, and there was a house sitting there on the left, that side of the road. The post office was in there. And of course, one night the post office was dynamited. And the post office, nobody in it, nobody was hurt. The mail was just scattered, not enough, you know, just to scatter the mail. So the post office was dynamited. Of course, Uncle Sam comes in with these greyhounds, you know, but they never did find a clue. So that ended the post office deal. But when it was finally made, when Roosevelt or the government doesn't own the post office now, it's all leased out, you know. But when the department they decided on Mrs. Brandenburg, so she got the post office, and they built that big white building down there on High Street. They had a grocery store and the post office, and their home was all in one building. So she had it there till she put in her 25 years and retired in 61 or 62 and has gone on. So that ended the post office deal. So then she had the post. Then when the post office deal, of course, was up, why I'm not going to talk about myself. But anyway, the post office deal was up. Of course, they wanted me to have it, but I didn't want it because I had the lodge and I had the bar. In the meantime, my husband had passed on, and I knew I couldn't do it all. So I said, no, I just don't even want. And no money, cancellation. When you sold a 2-cent stamp, you got a penny. You know why? Anyway, so she had the post office. So when she retired, why, they come over and wanted me to take it when she retired. Of course, I didn't want it. And then they went over, and John Wagner at El Sombrero, he took it. So John Wagner had the post office for 2 years. And they had to, in order for them to have it, they had to wall off half of their lobby, in the lobby, for the post office. And of course, Nell, his wife, never did like it because it did ruin her lobby, you know. And so they gave it up. So then the post office had it. And then, so then they came, I was the county chairman, so then they came to me and they wanted to, again, you know, it goes through the precinct and on up, you know. And then I said, well, I'll see if Betty will take it. That was my son's wife. So I said to Betty, I said, you've got 2 children, you don't have any money. And I said, that'll bring in a little more income, why don't you take it? So, of course, Betty took it. Of course, Bob was her competitor. Bob Troney was her competitor. So they went to Raton, and of course, Betty got the post office. She got the post office. But of course, she only kept it for 2 years, and then she gave it up. So then Bob got the post office. So Bob's had the post office for 25 years, and now he's retired. And of course, we don't know who the postmaster is going to be. So that's that. Now what else?
Anybody want to ask any questions?
What about trapping and wild animals, that sort of thing? Was there any kind of fur business in this area at that time?
The what?
Fur business, trapping?
Trapping was over with.
No, there's no trapping. They used to trap, when we came in the 30s, everybody had beaver stoles, beaver coats. You could just go down here at Young's Ranch, up at Dudley Hickman's, just kill those beavers, and then have them tanned. But, and that was our pastime in those days, my husband and mine. We'd go and watch the beaver build their dams, even when we lived at the Motley Mine. And of course, they just chew on aspens because aspen is soft wood. And they would just work, those beavers are workers, and build their dams. But Uncle Sam finally come in, or the state, I think it was Uncle Sam, and put a stop to all of that. And the beavers were all along. You could just drive along and watch the beavers work. And the people that, I know Doris Young and the Youngs, and they all had fur, little, you know, and real beaver, if you could afford to have them tanned, you know.
Anybody else?
But you can't get them now. There's nothing now. Deer is all.
What about developing the ski area?
Well, then, of course, the ski area. The ski area, Mr. Bolton came in from Oklahoma and built the motel. And the motel is the Alpine. It is the Alpine now. Mr. Bolton came in, and in those days there were no one living here. You didn't have any gossip. You know, there were no telephones. You just didn't know anything. But Mr. Bolton came in and bought where the Alpine is. I don't know how much land is there, but he bought that. And he built some cabins and his cafe. He didn't do it all in one time. And he built his shopping center and the duty shop and those shops that he has. He built the theater, and they had sleeping rooms and apartments. And Mr. Bolton built that. And of course, liquor. He had a liquor license and had a bar. And after so many years with that, he decides to build a ski area. But of course, as I said, we didn't know anybody. We didn't visit. And all of a sudden, he springs a ski area on Red River. And he surely had to be talking about it. He surely had to be dealing with the government because it's on government land. But anyway, he was very quiet about it. And then there was another man here in town, what's Mike's last name? Kendall? Mike, and Big Mike we call him. They went to Oklahoma City, and Mr. Bond, he just brought in all the oil well rigs, all the oil well machinery, you know.
Don Carmichael.
Don Carmichael, huh?
Yeah.
Don, huh? And he brought in all and he built that ski area. So you must have had the government, it was all outlined, it must have been all planned, you know, because, Uncle Sam gets a nickel or dime out of every skier that goes up there, you know. I guess it was pennies in those days. I don't think it's pennies anymore, but in those days he got a penny out of every dollar, every ticket that was sold, you know. So Mr. Bolton, he just built that ski area, built the big chalet, built the ski area and had that, and it sure was a nice place and well operated. But they were workers. If the machinery would go wrong, he and his wife would just get in their car. If it was 1 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock, they had to go to Denver. They would go and they'd be back in time with that part to get that machinery going. That's the kind of people they were. And they didn't have to be, but that's the kind of people they were. So he was the first builder of the ski area. And then he kept it for a number of years. And then, I don't know why he wanted to sell, but he decided to sell. And then when he sold to 5 doctors from Texas, the Panhandle and Amarillo. 5, I know their names, but I'm not going to mention them. But he sold to 5 dentists from Amarillo. So they come in and bought it. And of course, did a lot of improving. When it first was opened, all the shops were in the basement. The basements had dirt floor. It was just mud, wasn't it, Bob? Just mud and boards where you walked on board until they could go on. But it was finished and it was nice, and he had a wonderful ski area. And but anyway, he sold to the Red River Ski Association. And of course, they had it. And then in the meantime, they had a big fire. That operation all burned down. And they had to get the water from the river in those days. See, we had no water system, and the electricity was bad. Even if it was REA, it just wasn't up to par. And they just had a lot of operational troubles, just a lot of it. So then he sold to the ski area. Dr. Veal, of course, was the president of the association, and they ran it for a long time. They had a big fire, and it burned to the ground. But it was rebuilt. And maybe built a little better than it was before. I don't know. I just don't know. It is a lovely place, and of course they have more things now. And I used to work there all the time, but I don't even go down now anymore. So, that's the history of the ski area. And of course now it's been sold again into another corporation. So, but Mr. Bolton, I think Mr. Bolton should be honored, or he should be revered in some way. But because for a man like Mr. Bolton to come into Red River with nothing, I mean the town was nothing, and to build a ski area just to help the town, I think he demands some attention. But he never did get any. I think it demands some attention. But anyway, that's the history of the ski area. Then, of course, Mrs. Yeager came to town. Mrs. Yeager and Maisie and their children, they had children, boys. They all came, and they stayed at the wagon wheel in different camps and courts, and he'd come every year. And then one year, I don't know what gave it to her, but she decided that Red River needed a community house. And Mrs. Hal Yeager, Ruth Yeager, was the instigator, and I'm not just because it's Miss Yeager. If it was anyone else, I'd say the same thing. Mrs. Yeager and Maisie, and with the help of the town and the tourists, don't get me wrong, the tourists, they built the ski area. But that woman, it is built on Courthouse Square.
Community house.
Huh?
They built the community house.
I mean the community house. What did I say?
Ski area.
Oh, they built the community house. And on Courthouse Square. And of course the land didn't cost her anything, but she had to work with the county, you know, for the deeds and all that. And then Elmer Janney is another man that I think should be revered, but he isn't. And he was the carpenter. He was the carpenter in Red River, the only carpenter. I think he's built everything up the river, and I think he's built everything in town. Now, except the condos. Now, don't get me wrong, except the condos. And I think he'd be building them if he was alive. If he were alive, I think he'd be building them. But he didn't. He has gone on. And so they built that, and Mrs. Yeager built the community house. She had to get organized. She had to get her directors. Her first people to run the ski area was Dia and Harry Trigg. They were Clayton people. Of course, they had their program. Monday would be hiking, Tuesday would be bridge, and Friday it would be whatever it was. And they had their weekly program, you know. And they certainly were good managers, and they have had a lot of good managers since. And I don't know what Red River would do without the community house. It is a meeting place for weddings, funerals, well, any meeting that you have. Just our Christmas parties are all held there. And I just don't know what and I don't know, as many people as we've had in town, I don't know anyone that would have had the nerve to come and do what she did, because she had fundraising. She would go to the bars, she'd sell hard-boiled eggs. Of course, you know, money was money then, you know. Even if it was a nickel, it was money. And she'd sell popcorn, you know, and sell that, and had a lot of fundraising. And that's how the community house was built. But of course, it is bigger now, and they have a board, and they have men, and money is planned, and then they have memberships. We all pay $10 to belong, you know, and I suppose the tourists pay, I don't know. But anyway, then they have all these dances, and it is a wonderful place. And I don't know what Red River would do without that community house. It is known all over, and many towns would like to have it. So,
Nancy wanted to ask a question.
I can't hear her.
What did you serve in your first restaurant, the Evergreen? What did you serve?
Oh, just hamburgers. hamburgers and cheese, and chicken, and steaks. Hamburgers would be a dime, coffee a nickel, milk a nickel. Our milk was raw. The mooches would bring in the milk from Eagle Nest, or E-Town, or wherever they live, and they'd bring in the milk. It was raw milk, and no one died. People would come in, and they didn't ask, was your cow vaccinated, you know. We didn't know what vaccination was, you know. And and pie would be a dime, and steaks would be 35 cents. But you could get a T-bone for 35. Now you can't even buy one for 35.
Where did you keep your chicken to keep it cold?
Well, we didn't have any. Our refrigeration was just ice that would be put up in the winter time. We would cut ice. When our first year, we had to buy our ice because we weren't here for the winter, you know, to put it up. But after that, we'd put up our own ice and store it, and then we'd go out and we had ice boxes and put it in there. But we'd have to go to town, well, one day every week.
Bill Gallagher from Eagle Nest tells the story that when you needed a chicken, you'd say, Tony! And he would cut you.
Well, and of course there weren't any frozen foods. Now, I want you, if I'm not telling the truth, tell me. There weren't any frozen foods in the 30s. You know, people didn't have ice boxes. Now they have a half a dozen in each home, you know, but there weren't any. And they, you know, and so we'd go to all these ranch houses, Cuesta, San Cristobal, the ranch little farm places, and buy live chickens. Of course, that's the reason I can't eat chicken. Oh. Anyway, they'd bring them home live, you know. We had a pen at the back of the cafe, you know. They'd got this, you know. It was all I. And of course, you know men, they didn't care whether the water was hot or not, and you know how hot it would be to pick them with cold water. Oh. It was a chore, I'm telling you. And really, I just don't care for chicken at all. And I think that's one reason. And I think, I shouldn't say it. I think they have an odor, bath. They needed a bath, you know. I just don't care for chicken at all. People think that's funny, but that's the truth.
How many men were employed at the mine at its peak?
Well, of course, now they have about 400 or 500. But when we were there, I imagine about 100, 150 at the mine. The moly mine, it's a rare metal. It's used as a flux for steel, hardening of steel. And at that time, the moly mine, the ore was pure. Of course, nowadays, they're just getting the low grade, and they're having a lot of trouble, of course. And no unions, don't get me wrong, no unions, no doctors, no ambulance, no insurance. You were on your own. If you got hurt, you had to take care of yourself. And of course, so many of the men, now this is all the truth, so many of the men got silicosis. Silicosis isn't tuberculosis. Silicosis is an occupational disease. It was all rock drilling. The ore's in rock, you know. You drill those rocks. And I tell you, when the men and the machines were all out, Bob knows, the machines were all wet machines. When you would drill, that dust would just fly. When the men would come home, you would think they were dipped in the flour barrel. They were covered with that white dust. And of course, silicosis is a lung disease. Don't get me wrong, it's a lung disease, but it's inhaling the dry rock. And of course, and how I know, my husband had silicosis. In fact, that's what he died from, was silicosis. And he tried to sue, but he couldn't sue. I still have the papers. He couldn't sue because he was a coal miner in Kansas. He didn't have to have a physical here, and he couldn't prove that he didn't get it in Kansas, so the suit was thrown out. And that was the case of all the other men. They just couldn't get anything. Because when you worked there, you were on your own. You were just on your own.
How did your son get an education?
What?
How did your son get an education?
Tony Jr., he went to school at the Molly Mine. He went to school at the Molly Mine. And then when we had to come up here to live, he finished the grades here in Red River. And I think the 7th and 8th grades, we sent him over to Eagle Nest for the 7th and 8th grades. And he boarded with Maggie. And we had got a little money, in the meantime. He boarded with Maggie Moots and Emil Moots over there. Johnny Brandenburg also went, and he went over to Eagle Nest. Johnny Brandenburg went, and Rodney and Ruth Finks, other kids, they went over to Eagle Nest, but their mothers went and stayed with them, And then he boarded with Maggie and Emil Moots, who lived over there on a ranch, and they drove the school bus, and he boarded with them, so he got to ride the school bus to Eagle Nest. It was Eagle Nest. It was Therma then. It wasn't Eagle Nest what it is now, So that, and then after his grade school, he went into Raton. He got his 4 years of high school in Raton. I went with him and stayed with him in Raton. My husband stayed here, and wasn't anything to do, but we had dogs in the house, and he stayed here. And because there's no business in the wintertime. You'd starve to death if you depend upon Red River. Of course, now that's all changed. It's just as good in the wintertime as it is in the summertime here now, I'm talking about the 30s. I'm talking about the 30s. So he finished school there. Then he had 1 year of college. 1 year of college when he got through. In 41, he graduated from 37 to 41 in Raton. When he got through, he went to Amarillo Junior College. And he finished 1 year of schooling at Amarillo Junior College. And of course, when he was there, he took, I think airplane maintenance or air something, but anyway, whatever they have nowadays. And then World War I broke out. World War II broke out. And he came home. He wanted, and he wasn't 21, And he came home, and he wanted to go so bad. And of course, his dad wouldn't sign the papers, but he just, mother-like, mothers. So he just begged, and so I said, well, honey, I'll go and I'll sign your papers. Not that I wanted him to go, but, and really I'm thankful that he got the training. He went, and he was in air maintenance, and got to see the country, got to see the world, which he would never have gotten to see. So, and as far as what Uncle Sam gives, that's education and schooling, why, we have never asked, as my husband said, if they give it to you, you're going to pay it back. They're not giving it to you for nothing. That's the way my husband believed. He just, he didn't believe in government money. He said, son, if they give you the money, you're going to pay it back. They make us, just like what they do now, they make those kids think, those kids have, school now and colleges, they have to pay that back when they get a job. That's why they don't get any jobs. That is the reason. That's why they don't get any jobs. I mean, they just get a meager job, so they don't have to buy. You read it in the paper every day. I read it in the journal every day, where they're trying to get it tell names of student in the school, And so, of course, I don't believe in that either. So he finished 1 year, and then he was 21 or 22, and then he met his wife in Raton, and they married and had 2 children, and they've lived here ever since. The children, his oldest boys will be 39, and the girl is 38. They're in California, and neither one of them is married.
Oh, what is?
Tell us about the winter in Red River.
The what?
1930.
The winter time in Red River.
Oh, it was just awful. You just sit on the stove, and you never did get out of the house, And of course, we had to carry our water from the river, but we lived at for a long time, we lived there back in the cafe kitchen till I didn't get to build my home, till 41. And we'd fill that barrel with water, but there wasn't anybody here. But you just read, look at each other, and I don't know what you thought, but you just... there wasn't anything. There wasn't a thing here. There wasn't anyone here. See, everybody went out, Those that could afford it would go out, Oh,
What about newspapers, Tillie?
We didn't get any newspapers. Oh, we'd go to town. We had to go to Taos. From here to Taos, was 35 miles. All dirt roads and rain and mud. It'd take you all day to get there and all day to get back, And when you go to town, you'd have to buy your newspaper. And then you'd buy a paper, and maybe you'd go to town once a week. And it was just mud. In fact, the streets in Taos weren't even paved. Around the plaza, that was just old adobe mud. And I mean mud. Just,
When did you start in politics?
Come again.
When did she start politics?
When did you get interested in politics?
Oh, well, of course, coming from Kansas, you have to be a Republican. And I've always been a Republican, but never did participate, except to vote, when I was 21. And we just didn't participate. And then we came here and just registered to vote, just would go and vote. Really wasn't interested in Taos politics or Taos County at all, because in the first place it was all Spanish. We didn't know one word of Spanish. That didn't make any difference. We were all good people, still are. And we, until I don't know what. Oh, I think politics got into a mess. I'm thinking that. Taos County, they're always in a mess, all over. Even our governor's in a mess now. But anyway, Taos County got into a mess, and Taos County commenced to get, the village of Taos got interested in the politics. So much stuff going on that, they just couldn't solve in politics, And so Mrs. Pond, Dr. Pond's wife, they came to me, and they wanted if I wouldn't run for politics. Lad, I didn't know a precinct I didn't know anything. I knew I voted in Precinct 17, but I didn't know what that was. I thought it was just Red River, And they said, well, we'll show you and we'll tell you, and we. So they had their county convention, and I was elected in 64, and I was the county chairman now for 10 years. But I soon learned all the precincts. We had about 33. I had my own car. In the meantime, my husband had passed on. He wasn't here. I guess I wouldn't have gotten to do it, but anyway, he wasn't here. And so I had my car, and I worked the entire county. Just worked the entire county. And really, it was just like going to heaven to those people. Just to see a new face and new interest. And they would tell me where all the precincts were. I'd have to ask, too, along the highway. But I went to every precinct, met with all the precinct chairmen. I was the county chairman, all the precinct chairmen. And Taos County then went completely Republican. So that was a feather in my hat and in their hat. And it's been that way ever since. And I'm still I've been to two presidential conventions. Two presidential conventions.
And still are politicians.
And I just love it.
Okay, I think Tillie's tired.
No,
Oh.
I just wish I were younger so I could run for something. But,
We're going to have coffee with everybody.
I just want to run for something so bad. But at 88, who wants you? Who wants you when you're 88? Can't hear, can't see, can't do a lot of things.
We do. Let's all have some coffee, punch, and cookies on Tillie and with Tillie. All right? It's all right over here. The hostess will have it all ready. Let's go.